to introduce my co-host, Dominique Roussow. Dom, when you're ready, we are.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm just trying to switch over onto my laptop that's now decided to come back to life. But in the meantime, I'm just going to so I'm the social worker at Changes Rehab, and we're going to just talk a little bit about the stages of denial. Sorry, just hang on. Wait. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Sorry, I don't know what this thing is doing. All right, so just to run through denial just a little bit quickly, just to give a brief introduction. Obviously, we all know more or less what denial is, but we're going to actually break it down because denial can be quite complex. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's just, like, if you're in denial, that you just don't accept the truth of something. There's different layers, there's different patterns. So we're just going to break it down as we go through this. So it displays an important role in addiction when it comes to the addict themselves and their families. Denial is usually a result of ignorance around negative consequences of a person's actions, and this in turn results in an unguided or rational decision-making. People are prone to various cognitive biases that have powerful influences on how we make decisions. An example is the confirmation bias, causes people to embrace information that confirms their pre-existing narratives. People hold certain beliefs, often unconsciously, because they attach value to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down the stages, and I'll just talk about how it's going to affect the addict and the alcoholic as well as their families. Can I get the next slide, please? All right, so we're going to break down denial. So we're going to look at, like, what is denial? So if we look at the definition of denial as presented by the Oxford Languages. Sorry, guys, let me just close this door for a second.
Okay, Dom, do you want me to carry on? Cheryl, I do think we lost her. Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry, guys. I am back. Can you see me and hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna sorry, apologies, everyone, just technical difficulties. All right, so I'm going to I just want to close this. Yeah, I'm going to just speak about what denial is, right? So as I mentioned, that if we look at how it's been presented in the Oxford Languages, it's the action of denying something and a statement that something is not true or a refusal of something requested or desired. So it's a refusal to acknowledge the reality of one situation. It is a form of motivated belief or self-deception that detaches an individual from reality. How does this fit into addiction in the family structure? So when we look at denial initially, it's very much the case of, like, you come to treatment and your loved one doesn't believe that they have a problem. So that's where we look at the most obvious, the obvious form of denial. But as I mentioned, like, denial does have a lot of different phases and structures and stages that happens with it. So as I said, it's a common characteristic of addiction. So a lot of addicts and alcoholics will come into treatment. They won't believe they have a problem. There's usually a crisis. that's brought them into treatment, whether it's be from family or work, that they might lose their job. So that's essentially what we would think denial is. And what we're going to do is we're going to just look at, obviously, addicts and alcoholics don't want to believe they have a problem. Sometimes they think they're functional. Sometimes they think there's no consequences associated. So, it's a very common characteristic in addiction. So let's look at how it fits into this. So people will often do the following in order to maintain a positive view of themselves. They revise their beliefs in the face of new evidence of good news, but ignore bad news. Psychological practices such as distraction, forgetfulness, and repression may serve as a variation of denial. And these psychological processes may or may not be conscious. So, sometimes someone can be in denial, but what they're facing is their reality. So that's what they experience. So they think it's their reality. They think what they're doing is normal. They don't think they're affecting anybody. So it's quite thick when they come into treatment initially the first time. It could even by rehabs that are later on could also have the same problem. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to just look at we're going to break it down a little bit further. So it's also known to be a defense mechanism, which means that individuals with substance abuse disorders use denial to prevent threatening emotions entering their conscious thought. And this will be due to lacking the capability to cope with negative states. They will erect powerful defense in a desperate effort to avoid feeling them. They're keeping the uncomfortable feelings of awareness result in the development of a false sense of self, which results in the inability to seek out help. And they may have a terrible source of shame, guilt, self-hatred, and low self-worth. And it may be terrifying for the addict to acknowledge the harm they have caused to themselves or others. So I'm just going to break that down in those 3 stages so if they don't have the ability to, they'll put up a defense mechanism to try and avoid feeling certain ways. So, your loved one may know what they're doing is wrong, but they don't want to make the changes because it's really, really uncomfortable for them. So it becomes like this defense mechanism that, they just want to be protected and they don't want to end up, having to experience those feelings of shame and guilt. The same can work with the family, as if sometimes family don't believe that their loved ones are addicts, or, and that's where a lot of the rescuing and enabling will come in. So the addict or alcoholic will often disassociate from self when they are using to numb their emotion or feelings. A lot of the times we get patients that come in and they don't know who they are. They don't know, what their goals and ambitions are in life. They struggle with self-identity. They struggle to identify, what is their purpose? What do they want to do in life? And often carry a lot of immense guilt and shame around that as well. They don't want to feel the feelings, so they'd rather not admit the problem. So, admitting to the negative consequences requires one to end the behavior, but this may cause pain and distress because of fear. Therefore, denial protects the user from the consequences by denying the reality of the situation, which causes psychological pain and distress. However, the above information can be the same for the loved one or the family members too. So we often get, and I think it goes into this a lot further down the line in the presentation, but a lot of the times we get people that would come in and say, I only drink on weekends. I don't have a problem. It's medicinal for me. That's my favorite one. A lot of the marijuana users just say it's medicinal. So there's a lot of that happening, and they just really don't want to face reality. They don't want to face the fact that they have a problem and they're affecting those around them. I've had patients that have come in and said, like, if we ask, how do you think your addiction has affected your daughter or your son or your mom or your dad or your partner? No, they're absolutely fine. There's no problem. I don't see any problems with that. So yeah, that's quite a lot of the common purpose that we get there as well. So it can also be associated with the lack of impairment in insight and self-awareness. And this can manifest as denial in the severity of addiction and the need for treatment. for me, the self-awareness is around, you know, that they don't believe, because they don't believe they're a problem or they're functional, they don't understand how their behavior affects those around them. So, you know, it's not just about the drinking, it's the lying, it's the dishonesty, it's the secrecy, it's the hiding things, it's, you know, there's a lot of stuff that comes in there, and this just stops them from understanding the reality of the addiction. And then people who suffer from addiction may not care for their future and only worry about the current benefits they are experiencing as a result of their substance abuse. They have a tendency to ignore the negative outcomes or consequences of their addictions. When we state there that they only worry about the current benefits they are experiencing as a result of their substance abuse. Some of these examples could include things like, you know, like one of my most common ones is, when I drink, it makes me feel like I can socialize more. When I drink, it takes my depression away. When I use, I feel loved and I feel cared for. So it's that self-delusion that they create for themselves that everything is okay, when in fact it isn't. Okay, so then we got denial is central to the explanation of why addicts persist in using despite the consequences. I think this is the most obvious one, is that this is just outright, I don't believe we have a problem. I don't believe I have a problem. I don't need to stop anything. I don't need to change anything. Everything is fine. So they'll just continue with the behavior and continue using, even though they're experiencing consequences. Or on the other hand, they may have a family member that may have, you know, enabled their addiction, or tried to, like, either enabled the addiction, tried to bail them out of their consequences, for example, paying their bail to get out of jail, you know, trying to pay a fine for them so that they don't get arrested. So there's a lot of that happens in that situation. Denial will also alleviate anxiety, and therefore it is important to seek out treatment and admit they have a problem in order to be taught or given new tools for coping effectively with the pain associated with abstinence. So yeah, people just, if some people just believe that if I stop drinking and using, I'm going to feel all the guilt and shame and pain that I experience, not just for myself, but for those around me. And then that just creates that fear of, like, I don't want to stop. So now we're going to just move into the stages and how it applies to the addict and the alcoholic. Because I think this is quite important to understand, because denial, like I mentioned earlier, is not just about stopping the drink or drug. So when we look, it's defined into two different ways when we deal with the substance abuse. So we have type A and type B denial. We'll run through that. Type A is when a person sees, understands, and knows they have a definite problem, which leads to flat out denying the issue when they are confronted, but know that it is true. This is known as outright dishonesty or lying. This is quite common. People will believe, like, okay, maybe I do drink a little bit too much, or they get tired of living the way that they're living with the lying, the cheating, the stealing, the manipulating. They don't like what they're doing. And they get very defensive when you confront them. So they'll come out and say, like, if you say to your loved one, listen, you know, you didn't come home last night. We know where you were drunk, you're sleeping in your car. And then they'll come up with this extravagant excuse or extravagant justification as to why they were there, and it would not include the substance abuse. When we look at type B, is when they are partially or totally blind to the problem, and this is when they use rationalization, justification, and excuse making to make them believe that they do not have a problem, even when everyone else can see it. I find this is like, I got drunk this afternoon because my boss had a fight with me this morning, or I drink because I'm depressed. That's normally quite a common one. I drink because it makes me feel happy. I use drugs because I can socialize better with other people. You know, so they'll come up with all these extravagant excuses, but they can see that their drinking is excessive or their using is excessive, but they don't believe that it's a problem. But everybody else can see it. Next slide, please. Oh. Cheryl, I think just go back one way. I think is this the next one, or was it the other one? Okay, that's one. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to look at, there's also, there's two separate other types that fall under, it's weird because I think this all falls under type B, is where we have intellectual and spiritual denial. The intellectual denial is usually based on a lack of understanding or indefinition. So these are the people that really want to know, like, the statistics, the research, what is happening there, what is happening there. It could mean that the individual may not see their problem as serious due to the stigma or societal beliefs, or they may still be functioning, so do not see their problem as serious. So this would be, we normally call them dry drunks. So people that would try and abstain from their using or their drinking, but don't do anything to change the behavior. So therefore they end up, they still end up using. And then also there's a lot of cultures and religions and that don't accept people for being drug addicts and alcoholics, usually just because there's a lack of education. So that's what happens. And then we end up, with people that don't want to ask for help or reach out, or just remain in denial just purely because if they do that, they would be shunned from a community, for example. And then on top of that, we have spiritual denial, which is more difficult to deal with as it is hard to see. It will lock a person into compliance, blocking any possibility of ongoing sobriety. This means that the person just doesn't want to get well. They'll just comply and tick the boxes just to make sure that everybody else is happy. And that kind of blocks the need for ongoing treatment, because I'll just go do my 21, 24 days. I'll pretend like I'm looking for help, and then I can leave and everyone can get off my back. And then a major goal is to intellectually agree that the problem exists to full acceptance. So they need to accept the problem in order to move forward in their recovery. It's one thing to admit it. They can say, yes, I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic, but if they don't believe it internally, then they're never going to get well, because they can just say I'm an addict or an alcoholic. And sometimes this acceptance can take quite some time. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months. And that's why we always stress the importance of extended treatment, if that is a possibility in any way or form. Alternatively, when they leave treatment, we encourage them to continue in the 12-step program of recovery. So going to regular meetings, speaking to a sponsor, doing step work, so that they can internalize that acceptance. Like I say, some people get it quickly, some people don't. So yeah, I think that's something to also look at, is that sometimes people can just comply. Okay, I'm not sure if there's any questions as far as if Cheryl and Marley want to add anything before I move on to the stages.
No, Dom. So I don't have anything to add, and there's no questions yet.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I think I would just like to challenge everybody to think about their own loved one's denial. And then also look at your own denial. Because I think until we can actually acknowledge it, that it's a huge part of the process and part of the problem, denial stays like a nice hot sticky mess.
I love that explanation, hot sticky mess. Cheryl, I think, can you go back one, because as I was saying, stage 2, not stage 1. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So when we look at, so there's 3 stages of denial. And we're kind of going to run through them and how they apply, maybe to your loved ones in treatment, or how they apply maybe to yourselves. So like Cheryl's saying, look at your own denial. So the first stage is when a person truly does not believe that they have a problem or a disease of addiction. Sometimes people will come into treatment and they'll accept that, yes, I drink too much or I use too much and it's causing unmanageability in my life. But they don't believe that they actually have a medical disease. And that's usually based on lack of education. People don't understand, but they just think they drink and use too much and it's creating problems in their life. They don't believe that they have a disease. And they could deny having a problem despite the negative consequences that they incur. So even if they're getting consequences, they will deny it. Yeah, I got arrested, but it wasn't my fault. I got a final warning at work, but my boss is being an idiot. Certain things like that. Like they'll blatantly deny that the problem exists. Life, I always like to say, like the bombs and the explosions are going off and World War III is going off around them, but they see everything is fine. There's no problems. I can walk through the bomb shelter. I'm not going to get hit. It's the apocalypse and everything's falling to pieces, but they're perfectly fine. And I think that's the best way to describe the life of an addict or an alcoholic and their families. It's always just a lot of chaos, a lot of destruction. But the addict and alcoholic just walks through it like it's nothing. So when we overcome or looking at overcoming stage 1, they need to understand addiction through proper education, which will produce intellectual acceptance, which is commonly known as compliance. And then we move to that internal acceptance, which requires basic conversion in their belief system, which is usually one that takes the most time. So, and then lastly, they need to admit the problem continuously in order to internalize it. And I put step 1 there in brackets because a lot of the work that we do in primary care treatment is step 1 work, admitting the powerlessness and the unmanageability and that they have no control. We also do in primary care, we also do a lot of psychoeducation around addiction, just educating around the disease concept, cross addictions, what works, what doesn't work, because in order to progress from there, we have to break through that denial. And that's why we always say 21, 24 days is never enough time. Because especially if they come in and their denial is so thick and it takes 21 days just to start breaking that denial, then going home, they haven't really done much work. And that's why, if they can do some form of extended treatment to just continue breaking that denial, that would be a huge advantage. What we then look at is it goes into stage 2, is when a person denies the need for ongoing sobriety support after treatment is completed. This means that just because you say you will continue with meetings does not mean you will commit to it. There's no quick fix, and good intentions do not guarantee program action after discharge. So this one is also quite common, and sometimes this is where the families might also need to look at their denial. A lot of the times we get people, they'll finish their 21, 24 days or however much, the medical aid will cover for primary, and believe that they've got this waxed. They can go out, they'll do their 90-90, which is their 90 meetings in 90 days. They'll get a sponsor, they'll do step book, and they say all these wonderful things in the conjoint about this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it. And they get home and nothing happens. Because they get home, I'm going to
here, Dom.
Yes, you can.
Please, because I think we're all smiling because we hear this like, I don't know, every hour, maybe every day. When your loved one tells you, I've learned my lesson. When your loved one tells you, I've got this. When your loved one tells you, I'm going to work the 5 pillars, I know what to do. Worry. Be very, very worried. Because it's the one thing that families hold on to. We cannot wait to hear, I've got this. The other one, I will never use drugs or alcohol again. I've learned my lesson. Those are parts of the stages 1 and 2 of denial, even after treatment.
So Cheryl, I just want to add to what you said, and actually stage 1, realizing that addiction is a disease. I've seen it a few times with my experience that families would say, you're going to fix my loved one. You're going to fix my child. Or in conjoints, I would hear, are you ready to come out? You're fine now, right?
Yeah.
And they don't realize that it's actually disease. It's an ongoing disease. 21 days, 24 days in treatment is actually not enough. That's actually just the surface just a thin layer of ice is lying there. And
Yeah.
if the families, well, I encourage you as family members, if you get to a point where you actually accept that my loved one has a disease, supporting them in the recovery becomes easier. Because if you continue to say, no, this person is fixed, you are going to miss the whole plot around how can I support them, and that loved one is going to fall back into old habits and behaviors, because recovery is this ongoing process. It's forever.
Yeah. And on the other hand, when they hear that they've got this disease, many patients start to say, well, you see, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
It just had to happen. So if I relapse, you can't fight with me because I've got this disease. And then the parents also, family members also go, well, he's got a disease. He didn't do this on purpose. So, for clarity purposes, I say to the patients that I treat in families, the very first time you took a drug, you had a choice. Then the drugs took you. But once you've been in treatment, even if it's for 1 week, you become responsible for that recovery. And relapse is not part of addiction. It's not part of recovery. It's part of addiction. And that's another element of denial. Thinking, well, I've got this disease, so I can't help myself, I'll hold back. And I think it's time that we as families also stop feeding our own denial. I can tell you now, in 1983, my first rehab stint with a family member, and that's decades ago, I was told there's this 12-step program. It's new in South Africa. It's going to save me. And I promise you, on my life and all your lives, I will never touch drugs again. I believed it. We believed it. And 24 rehabs later, we stopped believing it. So if any of you on the platform tonight can stop believing soon, please do that work. Sorry, Dom, I don't mean to interject.
No, it's fine. It's all good. I see there's a couple of questions and stuff coming through. I think we'll get to those shortly. I just want to run through stage 2 and 3 quite quickly, and then we can maybe look at those questions. So like I say, with stage 2 is they deny the need for ongoing sobriety after treatment is completed. Like Cheryl says, I've got this, I can do this, I don't need to go to secondary, I don't need to go to a halfway house, I know what I'm doing, I'll never do this again. Those are all very big red flags. Especially if a therapeutic team is saying that these are the recommendations because of XYZ, it's difficult because like your loved one is just point blank refusing and believes that they're fine. This is where that internal acceptance comes in. So it's not just really about understanding, okay, I'm an addict and alcoholic and I've got a disease, but they need to internalize it. So it requires successful transference of dependency from self to a greater power outside of self for the maintaining of ongoing sobriety, which means that they cannot continue to control or run on self-will. So there's a lot of control that happens and self-will that happens in primary care as well. So this is where we start to teach them, that form of surrender and handing things over. Stage 2 will usually lead to repeated failure overcoming this means the successful elimination of the illusion that they create. So this again is breaking through that denial and getting them to full acceptance that, their life isn't just happy. And it's easily broken by successful transference of dependency from self to the support of the fellowship. So any therapy, any fellowship, this is where they would need to work through with that as well. Okay. Next slide, please. So lastly, I'm going to just run through stage 3. This is the need to be willing to go to any length in the recovery process which is an indicator that the addict or alcoholic has other priorities that are just as or more important than the maintenance of sobriety, which means their commitment to recovery may be strong, but the maintenance is weak. So what we were saying in stage 2, I'm going to go do my 90 meetings, do my sponsor, get step work. They'll do that for 90 days and then I'm cool. I can stop. I don't need to do this anymore. Wait,
Sorry.
no problem. Where was I now? Can escalate to one or two directions, where there's one is to increase commitment and involvement when living problems intensify, and the other is to eventually withdraw completely. So when this is what we call complacency, where they'll do recovery for a good couple of months, maybe a year or two, things start going well, families start trusting them again, jobs get better. Okay, I don't need to go to as many meetings. I don't need to see my sponsor. I don't need to do any of this again. It's a lifelong process, and they do get taught that in treatment. And when things are going well is when you and your loved one need to be the most vigilant, because that's where the complacency complacency sets in. Sorry. The stage usually doesn't last long. And this is where program will drop, behavior will come back, might stop their meds, and they will end up relapsing. This is dismantled by the constant recommitment to active participation in the recovery support fellowship, 5 pillars, and more activity, the chances are higher. With less activity, the chances of relapse are high. Once they get to stage 3, it's more difficult to get out of that denial, and it just gets thicker. And then they should, addicts and alcoholics should be striving for progress and looking for ways to better themselves. And, it's very difficult when as they go down this. Stage 1 is quite easy to come out of. Stage 2 gets a bit harder. Stage 3 is probably the most difficult. And it's really important that your loved ones or even yourselves are able to identify these signs, so that you know more or less how to work through it and then what to do from there. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that's about it. I'll just run through this quickly. Denial has many faces and disguises. The number one symptom is the denial of its own existence. It keeps people with substance abuse in an everlasting blindness, destroying any chance of healthy change. Hey, Boo. Cheryl, your computer's jumping.
Very glad.
There we go. Sorry. Okay. It will fight viciously for its survival all the way to instantly, and often results in jails, institutions, or death. It is not threatened by the addict or alcoholic trying to beat it by themselves, as it welcomes this. It does not want for the addict or alcoholic to join others who are addicted to destroying it. So, yeah, guys, I think it's just denial really thrives on addicts and alcoholics trying to fix things by themselves, and not reach out, because they don't believe the problem is as bad as it should be. So, yeah, I think that's it from my side. I know there's a couple of questions that have come through.
Dom, if I could, a nice way to try and understand denial is tonight when you're cooking, or tomorrow night, or whenever you're cooking and you're cutting an onion. If you cut the top of the onion, look at that as starting a process, starting a treatment process. Now, most of us top and tail an onion, and then we take that skin off, the thick, crinkly skin.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're coming into treatment first or 20th time, that's not the point, is we are taking that crinkly skin off, which is the skin that protects the onion. It keeps the smell in, it prevents it from going off too quickly, and it holds it in form. And then we take the skin off. The very first thing that happens is we start to cry. And then if you look into the inside of the onion, you'll see that very first layer is very thick. And if we were to cut that and take it off and put it on the side, look at the next one, cut it off, put it on the side, and keep doing that until we get that very thin little filament inside. That's the psyche of our loved ones. And all those layers that we've got on the side of our board indicates the variety of layers of denial. And the denial has to keep that filament, the psyche, protected, Because if they have to face reality, deep down, one of the parts of this denial is they think they're going to die. And they're not, funny enough, scared of dying from overdose. They think they're going to die from sobriety.